She signed her name at 2:47 on a Thursday afternoon in October. Not her married name. Her real name. Savannah Cole. The name she had carried before she ever met Brett Calloway, before she gave up her studio in Chicago, before she spent 12 years making herself smaller, so he could look larger in every room they walked into together. The pen barely made a sound against the paper. Across the conference table, Brett was already talking to his attorney in a low voice, unbothered, the way a man talks after finishing a business lunch. He didn't look at her. Not once. He just straightened the papers, slid them into his folder, and stood. Buttoned his jacket, the charcoal Tom Ford she had picked out for him 3 Christmases ago. And finally, let his eyes land on her face. No guilt. No grief. Nothing. Just the expression of a man who had closed a deal and was already thinking about the next one. "Take care of yourself, Savannah," he said. 11 years reduced to 5 words. She didn't answer. Her attorney, Patricia Holt, placed a hand briefly on her forearm and said quietly, "We're done here." Savannah stood, picked up her coat, and walked out of the conference room without looking back, because she knew if she looked back, something inside her would break in a way she might not recover from. Not today. Not on this sidewalk. Not in front of him. The elevator ride down was 15 floors of complete silence. The lobby was marble and climate-controlled, and full of people who had no idea her life had just been legally dismantled on the 14th floor. She pushed through the revolving door and stepped onto 52nd Street. The October air was sharp and cold. It hit her like a hand across the face. She stood there with a single carry-on suitcase. 1 bag. Because Brett's attorney had been very clear. The brownstone on West 74th was restructured under a business holding company 18 months ago. She had no legal claim to it. She had not known about this. Her own attorney had found out too late, 3 days before the signing, when the paperwork was already sealed. She had $38 in her personal checking account. The joint accounts, savings, investments, everything they had built together, had been quietly moved, restructured, redistributed over the past 2 years, while Savannah thought they were simply busy, simply growing apart, simply going through one of those rough patches that long marriages accumulate like dust. She wasn't going through a rough patch. She had been managed out. She pulled out her iPhone, 9% battery. She opened her contacts and called the one person she trusted completely, the one person who had been her anchor through all of it. Morgan Shaw, best friend since college, the woman who knew everything. It rang 4 times. Then voicemail. Savannah stood on the sidewalk, the city moving around her like water around a stone, and she thought, "I have 9% battery, $38, 1 suitcase, and nowhere to go." Then she looked up. A black Escalade was parked at the curb. The driver, dark jacket, calm eyes, was looking directly at her. He took 1 step forward and said, "Miss Cole?" Not Mrs. Calloway. Not Savannah Calloway. Miss Cole. She hadn't been called that name in 11 years. And the sound of it, standing on that cold sidewalk with nothing left, hit her somewhere so deep she had to press her lips together to keep from coming apart right there on 52nd Street. "Who sent you?" she asked. The driver reached into his jacket and held out a card. She took it, read the name printed in clean, dark letters, and her breath stopped. The card was heavy stock, cream-colored, with no logo, just a name, Nathan Pierce, and below it, in smaller type, Pierce Capital, San Francisco. Savannah stared at it long enough that the driver shifted his weight slightly, patient, unhurried. "Mr. Pierce asked me to bring you wherever you need to go," he said. "There's no obligation. If you'd prefer, I can take you anywhere in the city." She looked at the card again. Nathan Pierce. She hadn't spoken that name out loud in years. Hadn't let herself think about it either. The way you don't let yourself think about a version of your life you chose not to live. She got in the car. The leather seat was warm. Someone had left a bottle of still water and a small paper bag from a bakery on West 57th she used to go to every Saturday morning, back when she still lived in the city as herself. She didn't touch either. She just sat with her suitcase between her feet and watched Manhattan slide past the tinted window. Her phone rang. Nathan Pierce. She answered. His voice was exactly as she remembered. Unhurried. Low. The kind of voice that never competed with noise because it never needed to. Savannah. That was all. Just her name. Not a question. Not an apology. Just an acknowledgement that she existed and he knew it. How did you know? She asked. Tia, I've known for a while, he said. Not everything, but enough to be concerned. She almost laughed. Concerned. Such a restrained word for whatever this was. 15 years ago, Nathan Pierce was 23 and working his first real job as a junior associate at an architecture and development firm in Chicago. He had made a structural miscalculation on a project that would have cost the firm the client and potentially his entire career. He had worked through the night trying to fix it and gotten nowhere. At 6 in the morning, he had found the corrected drawings on his desk. Every error fixed. The calculations reworked cleanly, efficiently, with a handwritten note attached. I saw the file on the shared drive. Fixed it. You can thank me with coffee sometime. S. Cole. He had never gotten the chance to thank her properly. By the time he tracked her down, she was already engaged to Brett Calloway and making plans to leave Chicago. He had followed her career from a distance. He watched her work disappear behind her husband's name. He watched her stop being listed as a designer on projects he knew she had led. He watched her shrink. He said nothing because it wasn't his place, and because he had told himself she had chosen this life. Then he heard about the divorce, and he stopped telling himself things that weren't true. There's a plane at Teterboro, Nathan said. I'm not asking you to make any decisions. I'm asking you to get on it, get some distance from New York, and let me explain what I've found. Found about what? A pause. The kind that means the answer is complicated, and he is choosing his words carefully. About what Brett's been doing with your name, he said. Financially. Legally. For the past 2 years. The air in the car felt suddenly thinner. How bad is it? She asked. Bad enough that you need to know before his attorneys contact you again, which they will. Probably by Monday. Savannah looked out the window. They were crossing into the upper 40s now, heading west toward the Hudson. The sky was that particular shade of late October pale gold that always made New York look beautiful in a way that felt like a warning. She thought about $38. She thought about 9% battery. She thought about Morgan not answering. Okay, she said. Teterboro. The driver made a smooth left turn, and Savannah's phone buzzed. A text from Morgan Shaw. She glanced at the screen. Savannah, I need to tell you something. I should have told you months ago. Please don't hate me. Savannah read it twice, then set the phone face down on the seat beside her, and for the first time that afternoon, her hands were not steady. She told the driver to pull over on a quiet block off 10th Avenue. She needed to make this call without moving, without the city sliding past, without the strange, dissociated feeling of being carried somewhere while her life was falling apart. She called Morgan back. Morgan answered on the first ring, which meant she had been sitting there with the phone in her hand, waiting. That told Savannah everything before Morgan said a single word. I don't know how to start, Morgan said. Her voice was tight, the specific tightness of someone who has been rehearsing a conversation for so long that when the moment finally arrives, every rehearsed line collapses. Start at the beginning, Savannah said. Her own voice surprised her. Calm, flat. The voice she used in client presentations when the client was wrong, and she needed to walk them through reality without letting emotion make her easy to dismiss. Morgan started crying almost immediately, and Savannah waded through it, because she understood that the crying was not her problem to manage right now. "I met with Brett," Morgan said. "The first time was about 18 months ago. He reached out and said he was worried about you, that he thought you were struggling emotionally, that he wanted people around you who could help him understand what you were going through." Savannah said nothing. "I thought he was being a caring husband," Morgan continued, voice breaking. "I don't know what I thought. And he was so convincing. He kept framing everything as being about helping you. And then it shifted, slowly, and I didn't realize how far it had shifted until it was too late." "What did you tell him, Morgan?" "Not a question. A ledger request," Morgan told her. Over the course of 4 phone calls spanning the next 8 months, she had shared, without understanding the full damage, Savannah's emotional state, her doubts about the marriage, her fears about her career, the specific language Savannah used when she talked about feeling erased. She had shared it the way a friend shares things about another friend, thinking she was building a bridge, not handing someone a blueprint for demolition. Brett had used every word. When Savannah's attorney filed initial divorce paperwork, Brett's legal team had already prepared a counter-narrative built entirely on Morgan's descriptions: emotionally unstable, difficulty maintaining professional relationships, increasingly withdrawn and unreliable. Those weren't his words. They were Morgan's, repurposed, repackaged, weaponized. "There's more," Morgan whispered. Savannah pressed her fingers against the cold window glass. "The letter," Morgan said. "The one sent to the design firms. Brett's attorney drafted the legal language, but the specific language about your professional instability, the phrasing that would sound most credible to people in your field. Brett asked me to write it. He told me it was to protect you from being put in positions that would stress you further. He told me he was trying to help you step back gracefully." The silence that followed was the longest of Savannah's life. "I believed him," Morgan said. "Savannah, I know that's not an excuse. I know there is no excuse. I am telling you because you deserve to know the whole truth from me before you hear a version of it from someone else." Savannah sat in the back of the Escalade, with her hand flat on her thigh, and looked at nothing. 12 years of marriage, 12 years of choosing this life, and the person who helped dismantle it was the one person she had called when she needed to not be alone. "Are you still there?" Morgan asked. "Yes," Savannah said. "I'm still here." Then Morgan said, "There's one more thing. Brett mentioned, in one of our last conversations, that he had already signed the documents restructuring the brownstone. He said, and I'm telling you exactly what he said, Savannah will leave with what I decide she gets, and she won't have the resources to fight back. Savannah, he planned this, all of it. He planned it while you were still sleeping next to him." She ended the call without saying goodbye. Not out of cruelty. She simply ran out of words. There are moments when language stops being useful and becomes just another demand on a person who has nothing left to give, and this was one of those moments. The driver waited. Savannah reached into her carry-on and pulled out her MacBook Air, the older one, the one she had bought herself years ago before the marriage, the one she had kept in her home studio closet because it still had all her original design files on it, the work she had done before her name disappeared. She had packed it without thinking, instinct over planning, the way your hands remember what your mind forgets to protect. She opened the laptop on her knees in the back of the Escalade and pulled up her email. She knew what she was looking for. She had suspected since Morgan's words landed. She searched her inbox for the names of the firms that mattered most, the ones in New York, the ones where a phone call from the right person could open a door or permanently close one. 7 emails, all received within the same 5-day window, 3 weeks ago, while she had been sitting in their apartment, pretending the marriage wasn't already over, while Brett was having dinner with his attorneys in Tribeca, while she was making herself believe that maybe things would be okay. She read each one. They were polite. They were professional. They were completely, irreversibly damaging. Dawson and Lee Architecture. We appreciate your interest but are not considering candidates at this time. Meridian Design Group. After careful consideration, we don't see a fit. Hartwell Studios. We received some information that gives us pause moving forward with any professional engagement. That last one. Hartwell Studios. She had worked with their senior partner at a conference in 2019. He had told her she was the most naturally gifted spatial thinker he had encountered in 20 years. She had kept his business card in the front pocket of her portfolio. Some information that gives us pause. She knew what that information said because Morgan had just told her. Emotionally unstable. Difficulty maintaining professional relationships, increasingly unreliable. All of it written in Morgan's voice. All of it designed to sound like concerned observation rather than coordinated attack. All of it perfectly calibrated to plant just enough doubt that no one would hire her, and no one would ask too many questions about why. Brett hadn't just taken her money and her home. He had salted the ground. She closed those emails one by one. Her hands were steady again, which she understood to mean she had crossed some threshold past fear into something colder and more useful. She scrolled further, and then she stopped. The 8th email sat below the others, like it had been waiting patiently. The sender name was not a firm, not a recruiter, not a polite rejection. It was a person. A specific, impossible person. Eleanor Voss, Chairman Emeritus, Voss Design Institute, New York. Savannah had never met Eleanor Voss, so she had studied her work in school. She had spent 2 months in 2009, early in her career, before Chicago, before Brett, on a contracted interior design project for the Voss Institute's offices on Park Avenue South. She had poured herself into that project. The contractor had submitted it under the agency's name, as was standard. She had never expected credit. She opened the email. Ms. Cole, my name is Eleanor Voss. I believe you know my building on Park Avenue South, even if we have never formally met. I know what Brett Calloway has done to your professional reputation in the past 3 weeks. I also know things about your work and your history that I suspect you do not know I know. I think we should meet. I am available at your earliest convenience. E.V. Savannah read the email 3 times. Then she closed the laptop, looked at the driver, and said, "Take me to the airport." She paused, then added quietly, almost to herself, "Someone's been watching, and I don't think they've been watching to hurt me." Teterboro Airport sits just across the Hudson River in New Jersey, 8 miles from Midtown Manhattan. It handles no commercial flights, no loudspeaker announcements, no lines at TSA, no gates crowded with strangers eating fast food out of paper bags. It is an airport for people who move through the world at a different altitude than everyone else. Savannah had been there twice before, both times with Brett, both times standing slightly behind him while he talked to the handlers and acted like he had invented private aviation. This time, she walked in alone. Gerald, the driver, had checked her in by phone during the ride over. There was no check-in desk to approach, no ticket to show. Just a woman in a blazer who met her at the entrance and said, "Ms. Cole, right this way," and walked her directly out onto the tarmac. The sky over New Jersey was doing something specific to the light. Low sun, October gold, long shadows stretching across the asphalt, the kind of late afternoon that makes everything look slightly more important than it is. The Gulfstream G700 was parked at the far end of the private apron. It was large, not flashy. No logo on the fuselage, just a registration number and a matte charcoal gray finish that looked deliberate rather than expensive. The air stairs were down. Nathan Pierce was standing at the bottom of them, not in a suit, That was the first thing she noticed. Dark jeans, a heather gray merino sweater, no tie. His hair had more gray in it than she remembered, and he was standing with his hands in his pockets, in the way of someone who is genuinely comfortable being still, which is rarer in powerful men than it should be. He watched her cross the tarmac and didn't move toward her until she was 10 feet away. Then he came forward, not rushing, not performing, and stopped a respectful distance in front of her. "Savannah," he said. "Nathan," she said. They looked at each other for a moment. 15 years is a long time. Long enough that the person in front of you is both completely familiar and someone you have to relearn from the beginning. "You look," he started. "Tired," she said. "I know. I had a full day of losing everything." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, some more like recognition. A man who respects honesty more than comfort. "I was going to say like yourself," he said, "which I haven't seen in a while." She didn't know what to do with that, so she let it pass. They boarded together. The interior of the G700 was exactly what she might have designed herself if someone had asked. Clean lines, warm materials, cream and cognac leather, built-in cabinetry in light walnut, no excess. 2 facing seats in the main cabin with a small table between them. She sat. He sat across from her. The flight attendant, quiet, efficient, brought water, and then disappeared behind the galley curtain. The engines began their low pre-departure hum. Nathan opened a slim folder on the table between them. "I need to show you something before we take off," he said. Because once I tell you what Brett has been doing with your name, the way you see the last 2 years is going to change completely." Savannah wrapped both hands around the water glass and held it steadily. "Show me," she said. The plane began to move toward the runway. Through the oval window, the Manhattan skyline appeared, all glass and steel and late sun, looking like a postcard of a place she used to live. She didn't look away from Nathan. The engines lifted to full power, the wheels left the ground, and in that exact moment, as New York fell away beneath her, her phone lit up on the seat beside her with an incoming call. Brett Calloway. She looked at his name on the screen for 3 full seconds. Then she turned the phone face down and said, "Tell me everything." Nathan didn't rush. So that was the thing about him she remembered most clearly now. He never rushed. Even 15 years ago, when he was a 23-year-old associate with everything to prove, he had this specific quality of moving through information, the way a good architect moves through a space, methodically, paying attention to what was structural and what was decorative. He opened the folder. Inside were printed pages, financial records, LLC registration documents, 2 loan agreements on official banking letterhead, and a wire transfer summary with dates highlighted in yellow. He turned the first page toward her. "Brett incorporated a company called Ridgeline Holdings LLC in Delaware 14 months ago," he said. "Delaware for the obvious reasons. Minimal disclosure requirements. Easy to obscure beneficial ownership." Savannah looked at the registration document. Ridgeline Holdings, LLC. Registered agent. A law firm in Wilmington she didn't recognize. And there, under authorized signatory, her name. Savannah Cole Calloway. Her stomach dropped. "He used your name to sign off on the formation documents," Nathan said. "You were listed as a co-founder and secondary guarantor on 2 separate commercial loan agreements drawn through Ridgeline. The first was for $800,000 in January of last year. The second was $600,000 in March. Total exposure, $1.4 million. She looked at the loan agreements. Her signature was there on both. Her handwriting, her signature. But she had never touched these documents. She recognized the technique immediately because she had seen something like it once before, years ago, on a project where a contractor forged a client's initials on a change order. He had my signature on file, she said quietly. From joint financial documents. He replicated it. Nathan nodded. His attorney was careful. The documents are technically forged, but it will take a forensic analysis to prove that definitively, and that takes time and money you currently don't have. What Brett is counting on is that the legal process is slow, expensive, and exhausting enough that you'll agree to a quiet settlement before it ever becomes a public matter. What is Ridgeline Holdings for? She asked. Nathan turned to the next page in the folder. That's where it gets more complicated, he said. The primary beneficiary of the funds moved through Ridgeline is an investment vehicle partially controlled by a woman named Renata Cruz. She's listed publicly as a commercial real estate consultant. Unofficially, she has been Brett's romantic partner for approximately 2 years, and she is currently under preliminary review by the Securities and Exchange Commission for soliciting investments from private individuals using misleading return projections. Savannah set the water glass down very carefully. He was moving money to his girlfriend, she said, using my name, so that if the SEC investigation moved forward, the paper trail would implicate you as a co-founder of the vehicle, Nathan said. Not him. He would have plausible distance. You would be the name on the documents. The plane leveled out at cruising altitude, 30,000 feet above everything. Above the city, above the courthouse, above the brownstone she would never sleep in again. Above all of it. She looked at the transfer documents for a long time without speaking. Then she looked up. How did you get these? Nathan held her gaze. I have people who are very good at finding information that other people believe is hidden. The short answer is, Brett was not as careful about digital record separation as he thought he was. Does he know you have this? No. Does he know about you at all? A pause. Not yet. Savannah looked back at the folder. $1.4 million. Her name, her signature, forged. Her reputation, pre-destroyed to make sure that when this surfaced, no one would believe her version. He had thought of everything, except Nathan Pierce. But Brett Calloway had not thought of Nathan Pierce, the one person who had been quietly watching from a distance long enough and carefully enough to see the whole architecture of what Brett had built. And now, Nathan slid one final document across the table. A photograph, printed in color, of Brett and Renata Cruz at a private meeting in Miami, and the two men sitting across from them were not business partners. Savannah recognized one face from years of reading financial news. That man, she said slowly, was indicted for securities fraud in 2021. Nathan nodded. He was. And then the charges were dropped under circumstances that no one has fully explained. Until now. The man in the photograph was named Victor Drayle. Savannah did know that name. Most people in the financial and real estate world did, even peripherally. And Victor Drayle had been a mid-level hedge fund operator who had surfaced in 2019 as the central figure in what the financial press called a structured deception scheme, collecting investment capital from high-net-worth individuals using projected returns that had no basis in reality. The SEC had built a case. Then, 18 months into the investigation, the case collapsed. Key witnesses recanted. Evidence was ruled inadmissible on procedural grounds. Victor Drayle walked out of a federal building in Lower Manhattan and gave no comment to the reporters waiting on the steps. No one could explain it adequately. People in the industry speculated quietly over drinks at industry dinners. Then the news cycle moved on, as it always does. The man in the photograph, sitting across from Brett and Renata at what appeared to be a private dining room in a Miami hotel, was Victor Drayle. He was smiling. Brett was smiling. Renata had her hand on a glass of red wine and was looking at something off camera with the easy confidence of someone who believed she was untouchable. The photograph was dated 3 weeks ago. Renata Cruz is not just Brett's girlfriend, Nathan said. She's been operating as a financial intermediary, moving capital between Drail's rebuilt network and legitimate commercial real estate vehicles. Brett's company provided the legitimate wrapper. Callaway Property Group looked credible on paper, well-established, publicly visible. It gave the whole operation the appearance of conventional investment. And Ridgeline Holdings, Savannah said slowly, was the channel. The transfer vehicle, yes, the money that went in as consulting fees and development advances didn't go into actual projects. It moved through Ridgeline and then dispersed into Drail's offshore structures. So they used my name, Savannah said, to launder money. Nathan was quiet for a moment. That's the most direct way to describe it. The SEC investigation into Renata Cruz is still preliminary. They don't yet have the Ridgeline connection or the Miami meeting, but they will. When? That depends on whether someone gives them the documents. The cabin hummed. Savannah looked out the window. Below, through breaks in the cloud cover, she could see the dark geometry of farmland, somewhere over Pennsylvania, square fields stitched together in the failing light. She thought about Brett in their apartment, their former apartment. Probably right now. Probably comfortable. Probably certain that he had arranged everything cleanly enough that Savannah would simply disappear, financially exhausted and professionally discredited, into a version of her life small enough that she would never have the reach or the resources to threaten his. He had done everything right. He had planned for 2 years. He had used her planned for 2 years. He had used her best friend, her signature, her silence. He had not planned for a 15-year-old debt paid forward. He had not planned for Nathan Pierce sitting at 30,000 feet with a folder that documented everything. If I turn this over to the SEC, Savannah said, I become a witness in a federal investigation. Yes. And Brett knows I'm connected to Ridgeline through my forged signature, which means I have exposure until the forgery is proven. Yes. But you report first, with documentation of the forgery, and you are a cooperating witness rather than a subject. That distinction is enormous. And if I don't report? Nathan looked at her steadily. Then Brett's attorneys file a claim Monday morning, citing your Ridgeline liability as grounds to offset any remaining marital assets, which means what little the divorce settlement preserved for you gets absorbed. You leave with nothing, and you leave implicated. Savannah turned the Miami photograph over in her hands. 3 people who thought they were building something permanent on the assumption that she would stay small and stay quiet. She set the photograph down. I want to call my attorney, she said. Nathan reached into the pocket of the seat beside him and slid a secure satellite phone across the table. I had Gerald forward her number to this line, he said simply. She picked up the phone. Then she paused and looked at him with an expression that was not gratitude exactly. It was something more complicated, the look of a person seeing the full shape of something for the first time. How long have you been preparing for this? She asked. Nathan held her gaze for 1 beat too long before he answered, and in that pause, Savannah understood that the answer was not measured in days or weeks. They landed at San Francisco International at 11:47 at night. The bay was a spread of black and silver below the approach, the lights of the East Bay glittering across the water like something that wanted to be beautiful despite itself. Savannah pressed her forehead briefly against the oval window as the plane descended. She had spent the last hour of the flight in near silence after her phone call with Patricia Holt, who had listened to everything without interruption, asked 4 precise questions, and then said, "Don't touch anything, don't respond to anything, and don't go back to New York without talking to me first." Good advice, easy to follow when you have nowhere to go back to. Nathan had arranged a car and 2 rooms at the Ritz-Carlton Half Moon Bay, 40 minutes south of the airport on the coast. He had been matter-of-fact about it. It's quiet. You can sleep. We can work in the morning. No performance in the offer, just logistics. She didn't argue. She had $38, and the quiet certainty that she would spend none of this man's money a single minute longer than necessary. But tonight was not the night to establish that boundary. The drive down Route 1 in the dark was all coastal road and open sky, the kind of California night that smells of salt and eucalyptus and something ancient underneath both. She had only been to this part of the California coast once before, years ago, before Brett, when she had driven down from a design conference in the city with 2 colleagues, and they had stopped on the side of the road and sat on the hood of the car and looked at the Pacific and talked about what they were going to build with their lives. She had built something. It just turned out it wasn't hers. The room at the Ritz-Carlton was modest by the hotel's standards, a corner suite with French doors that opened onto a small stone terrace overlooking the water. She stood on the terrace for a long time after the bellman left, in her coat, but with the ocean wind pulling at her hair, listening to the sound of the Pacific below. She did not cry. She had expected to cry by now, and the fact that she hadn't worried her slightly. But the grief was there. She could feel it. It was just waiting. Like weather. Like something that would arrive on its own schedule rather than on anyone's emotional timeline. She went inside. She brushed her teeth. She lay down on top of the covers, still dressed, and was asleep within 4 minutes. She woke at 6:12 without an alarm. The sky outside was pearl gray, with the specific quality of Pacific morning light, softer than East Coast dawn, less urgent, like the day itself was still deciding. She made coffee from the in-room machine, took it out onto the terrace, and sat in the robe the hotel had provided, bare feet on cold stone, and watching the fog roll in from the water. She opened her MacBook Air. She didn't open email. She opened a blank document, and she started writing. Not a letter, not a legal statement, not an application. She started writing down every project she had ever worked on from memory. Every client, every space, every structural decision, every material choice. 12 years of work that carried other people's names on the documentation. She wrote all of it down from the inside out, the way only the person who actually did the work can. She wrote for 2 hours without stopping. When she finally looked up, the fog had lifted, and the Pacific was the color of hammered pewter, and the coffee was cold. She had 37 projects documented. She would do the other 19 tomorrow. Her phone buzzed on the terrace table. A video call. Not Nathan. Not Patricia. Not Brett. The name on the screen made her sit very still. Eleanor Voss. At 6:43 in the morning, as if the woman had known exactly when Savannah would be awake and sitting alone with her work spread open in front of her. Savannah stared at the incoming call for 3 full seconds, and then she answered. And the first thing she saw behind Eleanor Voss was a room she recognized immediately, completely, down to the grain of the wood paneling on the walls. The room behind Eleanor Voss was the study on the 4th floor of the Voss Design Institute on Park Avenue South. Savannah knew it because she had designed it. Not designed it in the sense of choosing paint colors and furniture from a catalog. Designed it in the complete architectural sense, the custom built-in cabinetry with the integrated lighting channels, the window seat with the storage drawers below using her own joinery specifications, the deliberate asymmetry in the bookcase arrangement that created visual interest without visual chaos, the specific pale oak paneling she had sourced from a mill in Vermont because it had a horizontal grain pattern that made the ceiling feel higher without structural modification. She had been 26 years old. It had been one of the best things she had ever made. The contracting firm had submitted the project under their agency name, as per the agreement. She had understood that. She had not expected to be credited. She had still cared about the work itself the way she cared about all her work, completely, down to the grain direction of the wood. And seeing it behind Eleanor Voss at 6:43 in the morning felt like finding a piece of yourself in a place you were told you were never allowed to be. "You recognize the room," Eleanor said. It wasn't a question. Eleanor Voss at 67 looked exactly like a woman who had spent 6 decades being exactly who she intended to be. White hair, cut very short, a silk blouse in a specific shade of deep teal, eyes that were dark and entirely awake. She had the particular stillness of someone who measures speech carefully and wastes nothing. "I designed it," Savannah said. "Yes," Eleanor said. "You did. The agency submitted it as theirs. You knew that was the arrangement when you signed the contract. But I noticed, Miss Cole, because that room is exceptional. And the agency that submitted it had never produced anything remotely like it, before or since." Savannah said nothing. She wrapped both hands around her cold coffee cup. "I had your work tracked for 2 years before I could confirm what I suspected," Eleanor continued. "I identified 14 projects between 2008 and 2016 that share a specific spatial philosophy, a way of handling light and proportion, and the relationship between built-in elements and open space that is unmistakable once you know what you're looking for. 14 projects, all submitted under various agency names, all of them superior to anything those agencies produced independently. That's a long time to track someone's work," Savannah said carefully. "I'm a patient woman," Eleanor said. "I'm also a woman who has watched this industry quietly erase its most talented female practitioners for 40 years, and I have reached an age where patience with that particular injustice has its limits." She leaned forward slightly. "When you married Brett Calloway and stopped working independently, I assumed I had simply been wrong about you, that you had chosen comfort over contribution. That happens. I don't judge it. But then, 3 weeks ago, I received a communication forwarded to me by a colleague at Hartwell Studios. It was Brett's letter, the one designed to end your professional reputation." Savannah felt the familiar cold settle in her chest. "I recognized the malice in it immediately," Eleanor said. "Not because I know Brett Calloway, but because I have seen that letter before, written by different men about different women over 40 years. The language changes. The intent never does." "So you emailed me," Savannah said. "So I emailed you," Eleanor confirmed, "because I have something you need to know about and something I want to offer you. The first is this. I have documentation, photographs, dated records, project files with embedded metadata that can establish authorship on at least 9 of those 14 projects. Enough to prove, comprehensively, that the professional reputation Brett attempted to destroy is built on work that is real and substantial and verifiable." Savannah's throat tightened. "And the offer?" she asked. Eleanor Voss was quiet for exactly 3 seconds, the silence of a person choosing the weight of their next words with great care. "I want to give you the Institute," she said. "Not the building, the platform, the credibility, the audience. I want you to lead a new initiative, publicly, under your own name, using work that is provably yours. I want the industry to see what it missed, and I want Brett Calloway and every man who has ever handed a woman's work to someone else to understand what it cost them." Then she added quietly, "And there is one more thing you don't yet know, about your connection to this institute, about why I really called." Eleanor Voss set down the cup she had been holding and looked directly into the camera. "Your mother's name was Diane Cole," she said. Savannah went very still. She graduated from the Pratt Institute in 1979. She was one of the most gifted students the program had ever produced, by her professor's accounts. She worked briefly for a firm in Boston, then moved to Ohio, had a family, and stopped practicing professionally. She died in 2004. Eleanor paused. I knew her. We were in graduate school together for one semester, in 1976, before I transferred. We stayed in contact loosely for years after. She used to send me letters about her daughter, a girl who, she said, saw rooms differently than other people, saw the way light moved through space, saw what a room wanted to be before anyone told it. Savannah had not spoken. She could not find the place where speech was. Her mother had died when Savannah was 22. A swift, merciless illness. No negotiation. No warning sufficient to feel like warning. In the 2 years after, and Savannah had finished her degree and built her early career with the specific ferocity of someone who is working partly in tribute to a person they cannot bring back. She had never known her mother talk to anyone about her. When I read Brett's letter 3 weeks ago, Eleanor continued, and saw your name, I knew immediately. Diane Cole's daughter, the girl who sees rooms. Her voice was measured, but something underneath it was not entirely steady. I have been waiting for a reason to reach out to you for years, Savannah. I did not want to intrude. I did not want to seem presumptuous, perhaps, or sentimental. But when I read that letter, I thought, no, not this. Not this woman. Not Diane's daughter. Savannah pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a moment. Then she lowered it, sat straight, breathed. Oh, what did she tell you about me? She asked. Her voice was level. Only someone listening very carefully would have heard the fault line in it. Eleanor smiled, the first full smile of the conversation, and it changed her face entirely. She said you used to rearrange your bedroom furniture every month because you were trying to find the configuration that made the most of the morning light. She said you were 7 years old. Savannah laughed. It was a short laugh, involuntary, the kind that breaks out of a person who is holding a great deal together. I drove my father insane, she said. She said you got it right by the time you were 8, Eleanor said. South-facing desk, bed along the east wall, so you woke up with the sun rather than against it. She kept a photograph of it. The Pacific was loud outside on the terrace. Savannah was aware of it the way you are aware of your own heartbeat. It was always there. You just don't always hear it. What is the offer, exactly? She said. The real shape of it. I want you to lead a new design residency program through the Institute, Eleanor said. Full creative authority. Your name on everything. Your work documented and published. We launch with an exhibition. The 14 projects, properly attributed, with the full record of your actual contribution. We invite the industry. We invite the press. We do it correctly. That will create conflict, Savannah said. The agencies that benefited from those projects. Yes, Eleanor said simply. I know. I am 67 years old, and I have stopped being concerned about conflict created by accuracy. Savannah looked out at the ocean for a moment. Oh, she thought about Brett, about the brownstone, about $38 and 9% battery, and a suitcase on a sidewalk. She thought about Morgan, and the letter, and 7 polite rejections, and the specific calculation of a man who had decided she could be erased. She thought about her mother rearranging furniture at 7 years old to find the light. I'll need to see the documentation first, she said. The 14 projects, the metadata, all of it. I expected nothing less, Eleanor said. I'll have it delivered to wherever you are by end of day. One more thing, Savannah said. The letter Brett sent, you said Morgan Shaw helped write it. How do you know that? Eleanor Voss looked at her steadily. Because Morgan Shaw called me 2 days ago, she said. She called me directly. She had found my name in Brett's email drafts. He had apparently considered sending the letter to me as well, before deciding I would be harder to influence. Morgan wanted me to know she had helped write it. She said she needed someone outside the situation to know the truth in case she lost her nerve to tell you herself. Eleanor's voice stayed even. She was not calling to protect herself, Savannah. She was calling to make sure that if she failed you again, someone else would not. Nathan knocked on her door at 9 that morning. She opened it with her MacBook Air under one arm and the hotel notepad in her hand, already half covered in notes. He looked at the notepad and then at her face and said, "You slept." 4 hours, she said. "Come in." They worked at the table by the window with the Pacific outside and room service coffee going cold between them, and it was the most productive 4 hours Savannah had spent in years. Not because the situation was good, but because she was finally moving towards something instead of pretending something wasn't happening. Patricia Holt, her attorney, joined by phone at 9:30. Nathan's legal team in San Francisco patched in at 10. By noon, they had a strategy mapped across 3 parallel tracks. Track 1, the forgery. Patricia had already retained a forensic document analyst. The loan agreements from Ridgeline Holdings would be examined within 48 hours. The analysis would confirm what they already knew, that Savannah's signature had been replicated from existing joint financial documents. And once that confirmation was in hand, Savannah had legal grounds to formally disavow the Ridgeline documents and remove her name from the associated liabilities. Track 2. The SEC, Nathan's securities attorney, a former enforcement officer who had spent 12 years at the SEC before moving to private practice, and who understood, as he put it, exactly how they think and what they need to move fast, was preparing a voluntary disclosure package. Not an accusation, a comprehensive documented report. The Ridgeline records, the wire transfers, the Miami photograph, Victor Drayle, the preliminary connection to the broader network, a cooperating witness report submitted before any formal subpoena landed made Savannah a resource rather than a target. The timing was everything. Track 3, the public record. Some Eleanor Voss had already confirmed she would move forward with the attribution exhibition. Her institute's legal team was reviewing the metadata documentation on the 14 projects. The exhibition would not be framed as an attack on the agencies involved. It would be framed, simply, as a historical correction. Accurate attribution of significant work, the kind of thing that the design press would cover precisely because it was true, documented, and long overdue. Savannah listened to all of it, asked questions, made notes, and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not relief, not joy, not even confidence. Just clarity. The specific, clear-eyed certainty that comes from understanding the full terrain of a problem and knowing you have the right tools to navigate it. At one point, Nathan's securities attorney said something about the optics of cooperation versus resistance, and Savannah cut him off, gently but completely. "I'm not doing this for optics. I'm doing it because it's accurate, and because the right thing to do legally and ethically happened to be the same thing in this case, which is unusual, and I'm not going to waste it." There was a brief silence on the call. Then the attorney said, "Noted." Nathan looked at her from across the table and said nothing, but he wrote something on his own notepad and turned it toward her. 2 words. "Still you." She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked back at her own notes. At 2 in the afternoon, the call wound down. Patricia would file the forgery documentation Monday morning. The SEC disclosure would go in by Thursday of the following week, when Eleanor's team needed 2 weeks to finalize the exhibition framework. After the call ended, Savannah sat for a while in the quiet of the room. Nathan refilled his coffee and stayed at the table, not asking anything, not filling the silence unnecessarily, comfortable with quiet in the way of someone who respects what a person is carrying. "I need to call Morgan," Savannah said. Nathan nodded. He took his coffee and went out to the terrace, closing the glass door behind him, giving her the room. She dialed. Morgan answered immediately, as she had the day before. "I know about Eleanor Voss," Savannah said. "I know you called her." Morgan was quiet for a long moment. "I couldn't let it just," she started. "I know," Savannah said. "I need you to do something. Can you do something?" "Anything," Morgan said, and the word came out like a person handing over something they had no right to withhold any longer. "I need you to write down everything," Savannah said. "Every meeting with Brett, every conversation, every instruction he gave you about what to say, what to write, what to share. All of it, from the beginning. Not for me, for the record. My attorney will contact you tomorrow morning." She paused. "And Morgan, after this is over, I don't know what we are, but I know what you can be right now. You can be the person who tells the truth when it matters. Don't waste it." She ended the call. Outside on the terrace, Nathan had turned to face the ocean, the wind pulling at his sweater, and Savannah sat watching him through the glass and understood, with a certainty that was quiet and complete, that not everything she had lost was going to stay lost. Brett Calloway's world started coming apart on a Tuesday. He didn't know it was coming apart. That was the specific cruelty of it. The collapse didn't announce itself. It assembled quietly in the background, the way structural damage works in a building, invisible for a long time, and then, suddenly, entirely present. The first sign was small. His assistant forwarded him an email from a commercial real estate contact in Miami who had casually mentioned hearing regulatory noise around Ridgeline Holdings. Brett read it twice, told himself it was gossip, deleted it, and went to lunch. The second sign was less small. His attorney called late Tuesday afternoon with a measured tone that Brett had learned to recognize over 20 years as the tone of someone delivering information they would prefer not to deliver. The forensic document examiner retained by Savannah's legal team had submitted preliminary findings. The Ridgeline signature documents were flagged as forensic anomalies. Translation: the forgery was going to be provable. His attorney said they had options. Brett said he understood and ended the call. He sat in his office on the 22nd floor of his building on Park Avenue and looked out at the city and thought about the architecture of what he had built. He had been meticulous. He had been careful. He had accounted for Savannah's limited finances, her lack of professional standing, her emotional state after the divorce. He had accounted for Morgan's usefulness, and then her discardability. He had accounted for Renata's pragmatism and her willingness to operate in ambiguous legal territory in exchange for the financial arrangement he provided. He had not accounted for anyone caring enough about Savannah Cole to spend resources and time on her behalf. That was his fundamental miscalculation. He had spent 11 years watching Savannah make herself smaller and more isolated, had in fact actively cultivated her isolation, because isolated people have fewer resources and fewer witnesses, and he had concluded from this that she was, essentially, alone. He had not asked why she had become isolated. He had not considered that isolation is sometimes a condition imposed on a person rather than a condition chosen. He had not considered Nathan Pierce. By Wednesday morning, Renata Cruz had retained her own attorney and was no longer returning Brett's calls. This was information that arrived through a mutual contact, not from Renata directly, because Renata was already, as his attorney later put it, cooperating with preliminary SEC inquiries. The phrase landed in Brett's chest like a stone dropped into still water. Renata was talking. The Brooklyn Waterfront Project, a $200 million redevelopment contract he had spent 14 months cultivating, went to a competing firm on Thursday. The investor's office sent a single-line email. Given recent developments, we have decided to proceed with an alternative partner. No specifics. No opportunity to respond. Brett called his attorney 4 times on Thursday. His attorney answered twice. By Friday, 3 of his senior project managers had requested meetings, the kind of meeting that is not about project management. Two had updated their LinkedIn profiles. His director of operations had taken a personal day and had not submitted a return date. Brett understood what all of this meant. He had built his company on the ability to read a situation accurately. He was reading this one accurately now. On Friday evening, alone in his office with the city going dark outside and a glass of bourbon he was not tasting, he picked up his phone and called Savannah. He did not know what he planned to say. He was not a man who planned apologies because he was not a man who had practiced vulnerability in any meaningful way. He had treated every human relationship in his life as either an asset or a liability and had managed them accordingly. But he called. She answered on the fourth ring. "Brett," she said. Just his name. No warmth, no hostility. The same flat, clear register she had used in the lawyer's office. A person who has nothing left to lose also has nothing left to perform. He found, to his genuine shock, that he didn't know what to say. The silence lasted long enough to be uncomfortable for both of them. "I made a mistake," he said finally. The words came out unformed, nothing behind them, no architecture. Just the sound of a man who has reached the edge of what self-belief can hold. "Yes," Savannah said simply. "You made a lot of them." She didn't say it with satisfaction. She said it the way you confirm a fact that everyone in the room already knows. "But Brett, the mistakes that matter aren't the ones you made against me. So they're the ones you made against people who trusted you with their money. That's what's going to define what happens next." A pause. "I hope, for your sake, that you have a better attorney than you deserve." She ended the call. Across the continent, in a hotel room above the Pacific, she set the phone down on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling, and for the first time in 11 years, felt the specific lightness of a person who has said exactly what they meant, and nothing more. Morgan Shaw arrived at Patricia Holt's office on Monday morning at 8:45. She had not slept. That was apparent. She was wearing a coat she had clearly thrown on over clothes she had been awake in for most of the night, and she carried a tote bag that contained, as she placed it on Patricia's conference table, a printed stack of documents 2 inches thick, a USB drive, and a spiral notebook filled with handwritten notes that she had been making since Friday evening. Patricia, who had seen many things in her career and registered most of them without visible reaction, looked at the stack and raised an eyebrow. "I wrote down everything I could remember," Morgan said. "The dates are approximate on some of the early meetings, but I've cross-referenced them with my calendar. The emails between me and Brett go back 17 months. I still have them in a personal account he didn't know about. He thought he was communicating with me only through a thread I later deleted. But I had forwarded the important ones to myself." Patricia picked up the top page of the printed stack and began reading. "The USB drive has the email archive," Morgan continued. "So the notebook is the narrative account. What was said, how he framed things, the progression of how the requests changed from 'help me understand her emotional state' to 'help me describe her to professional contacts.' I've noted every point where I understood, with full clarity, that I was participating in something harmful and chose to continue." Patricia looked up from the page. "You are explicitly documenting your own culpability." "Yes," Morgan said. "I know that creates legal exposure for me. I've spoken with an attorney. I understand the risks. I'm doing it because it's the only accurate account, and the accurate account is what's actually useful." Patricia set the page down, looked at Morgan for a moment. Then she said, "Savannah told me you might do this." Morgan looked at the table. She told me not to waste it," she said quietly. "I'm trying not to." The statement Morgan provided over the following 3 days was submitted to both Savannah's legal team and, through the SEC disclosure process, to the securities investigators who were building their case against the Doral Cruise network. Her account, detailed, time-stamped, self-implicating in several key places, provided the human architecture behind the financial documentation. It explained the why and the how. It placed Brett's actions in a clear pattern of premeditated coordination, not isolated opportunism. Brett's attorney, when faced with the combined weight of the forensic signature evidence and Morgan's statement, made 3 calls in 2 hours and then called Brett and told him that the negotiating landscape had changed substantially. On the financial side, the SEC's preliminary review of Ridgeline Holdings escalated to a formal investigation within 11 days of the voluntary disclosure submission. The Miami photograph, Victor Drayle, Brett, and Renata Cruz at a private dinner 3 weeks earlier was the kind of concrete evidence that investigations wait months for and rarely receive so completely. Renata Cruz, whose attorney had advised her in very clear terms what cooperation looked like versus non-cooperation, agreed to provide testimony in exchange for consideration on the lesser charges against her. What she provided in 3 hours of deposition was sufficient to expose the full operational structure of what the SEC would eventually describe in their public filing as a systematic fraudulent investment scheme spanning 4 years and involving misappropriated capital in excess of $22 million. Brett Calloway's name appeared in that filing 4 times, not as a footnote, as a principal. Through all of this, the filings, the investigation, the slowly accelerating legal machinery, Savannah remained in San Francisco. She was not a passive observer. She was a cooperating witness with obligations and a demanding timeline. But she was also, simultaneously, doing something else entirely. She was working. Nathan had provided her with a proper workspace in the Pierce Capital offices on Market Street. Clean desk, good light, fast connection. She spent her mornings in that office building out her documentation for Eleanor's exhibition, project by project, material by material, photograph by photograph, the full rebuilt record of work that had been done under her hands and credited to other names. It was painstaking. It was also, quietly, deeply satisfying in a way she had not allowed herself to feel about her work in years. One afternoon, Nathan came in to check on something and found her cross-referencing 3 sets of photographs side by side on the screen, annotating them with the kind of focused attention that makes a room feel inhabited. He stood in the doorway for a moment before she noticed him. When she looked up, he said nothing about the work. He just said, "I brought you coffee." And she noticed he had also brought 2 cups, and he set one on her desk and sat down across from her in the visitor chair with the easy, settled quality of a man who intends to stay. And she let him, and they worked in the same room in silence for the rest of the afternoon, and it was the most comfortable Savannah had felt in a space that was not entirely hers in as long as she could remember. The SEC filed formal charges against Brett Calloway on a Wednesday morning in late January. The formal announcement came through the Commission's public communications channel at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, the way these things do. Without dramatic music, without courtroom theatrics. Just a press release, a case number, and language so deliberately precise and dryly bureaucratic that it required a second reading to fully absorb the scale of what it described. Brett Arthur Calloway, a founder and CEO of Calloway Property Group LLC, was charged with securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering in connection with the Ridgeline Holdings investment vehicle. The charges carried potential penalties that the financial press, in their summaries published throughout the afternoon, helpfully translated for general readers. The numbers were large. The press coverage was immediate. The Wall Street Journal ran it on the digital front page within the hour. The New York Times real estate desk had a piece up by noon. The financial press had been tracking the SEC's investigation of the broader Drayle network for weeks without knowing the full scope, and Brett's name, when it appeared, connected the story to the high-profile commercial real estate world in a way that elevated its news value considerably. By 2 in the afternoon, 3 of Callaway Property Group's remaining major investors had issued statements noting they were reviewing their positions. By 4, the company's line of credit at its primary lending institution had been placed under review. By the time the markets closed, the infrastructure of what Brett had spent 20 years building was visibly trembling. Renata Cruz had already settled with prosecutors. Her cooperation agreement was referenced briefly in the SEC filing in the language that describes such arrangements without celebrating them. She was not present at any of the events that followed. She had, in the precise terminology of people who handle these situations professionally, made herself unavailable. Victor Drayle was arrested at his residence in Fort Lauderdale on the same day as the charges were filed. His arrest photograph appeared in several news outlets and showed a man who looked considerably less comfortable than he had in the Miami dinner photograph. Brett was not arrested. He was charged, which is different, a summons rather than handcuffs at this stage. He had surrendered his passport voluntarily, which his attorney had advised as a demonstration of cooperation. He was in New York. He was meeting with his legal team every day. He was according to a mutual contact who mentioned it to Patricia in passing, not sleeping well. Savannah read about all of this on her laptop in San Francisco. She read it the way you read about weather in a city you no longer live in, with awareness and recognition, but no longer with the specific vulnerability of someone standing in it. She felt no triumph. She wanted to be clear with herself about that, because triumphalism can corrupt things. She felt something closer to the feeling you get when a structure that has been under improper load finally redistributes that load correctly. Not pleasure. Relief. The relief of accuracy. She called Patricia. "What do I need to do from here?" she asked. "Your witness cooperation obligations are fulfilled," Patricia said. "The forgery findings have been formally filed and accepted. Your name has been removed from the Ridgeline documents as of last week's court filing. You are no longer liable. There is no further action required from you unless they call you to testify, which is possible, but not certain." "The $38, Savannah said. Patricia laughed. "A rare occurrence. So your motion to recover misappropriated marital assets has been accepted. Given the documented evidence of premeditated asset restructuring during the marriage, the court has ordered a reassessment of the original divorce settlement. I am expecting a revised figure within 30 days. It will be substantially different from what you left with." "Substantially," Savannah repeated. "Enough to matter," Patricia said. "Enough to build with." That afternoon, Nathan found her standing on the small terrace outside the office, looking out over Market Street in the winter light. He came and stood beside her without asking anything. After a while, she said, "I keep thinking about the first day, standing on 52nd Street with that suitcase." "That was 14 weeks ago," he said. "I know. It feels like a different life." She paused. It was a different life." He was quiet for a moment. "Then, what do you want the next one to look like?" She thought about it genuinely. Not the reflexive answer, the performed answer, the answer designed to seem appropriately modest. The real answer. "I want to build things that are mine," she said, "and I want to wake up in the morning knowing exactly who is in the room with me." She turned and looked at Nathan, and the way he looked back at her, steady and unhurried and completely present, was its own kind of answer. Neither of them said anything more about it that afternoon. They didn't need to. Some things are understood before they are said, and the moment of understanding is its own kind of arrival. The exhibition opened on the first Thursday in April. The Voss Design Institute's main gallery on Park Avenue South had been reconfigured for the occasion. Walls repainted in the exact warm white that Savannah had specified, lighting rigs adjusted to the angles she had diagrammed, the flow of the space redesigned from the entrance to allow visitors to move through the work chronologically, beginning to present. 14 projects to present. The show was called Attributed. The subtitle in smaller text beneath, 14 works. 1 designer. The record? Corrected. Eleanor Voss had written the catalog essay herself. 4 pages, clean and direct, with no sentimentality and no excess. It described the history of unattributed work in American design, the specific mechanisms by which women's contributions were systematically redirected toward male-headed agencies. And then it turned to the 14 projects and described them one by one, each with full documentation. The dated files, the embedded metadata, the correspondence records, the site photographs, the material specifications in Savannah's handwriting. The catalog was factual. That was its power. There was nothing to argue with because every claim was sourced and every source was attached. The design press had been briefed in advance. Architectural Digest ran a feature the same morning the exhibition opened. Dezeen had a piece online by 9 a.m. 3 other publications followed by noon. The story was not framed as a scandal. It was framed as a correction, which was more damaging and more lasting than scandal, because scandal fades and corrections become part of the permanent record. Several of the agencies involved issued statements. The statements varied in their degrees of grace. None of them changed what was documented. None of them had to. The evening opening was attended by 200 people. Savannah stood near the entrance for the first hour, dressed in a slate blue suit she had bought herself that week. Not designed by anyone famous, just well made. The right color. Hers. And she talked to people and answered questions and accepted the specific kind of regard that comes from a room full of people who are seeing you clearly, possibly for the first time. Eleanor Voss arrived at 7:15. She moved through the gallery slowly, reading each panel with the attention of a person who already knows the material and is checking it against memory. When she reached Savannah, and she took both her hands briefly and said, "Your mother would have been insufferable about this, in the best possible way." Savannah laughed. The real laugh this time. Full, unguarded. She would have framed the catalog and put it in the living room. She would have sent copies to everyone she ever met, Eleanor agreed. Nathan was there, near the back of the gallery, talking to 2 of the Institute's board members. He had flown in from San Francisco that morning. He was wearing a suit, charcoal, well-fitted, the kind of deliberate effort that a man who usually doesn't make deliberate efforts makes when something matters to him. He caught her eye across the room at one point and raised his glass slightly, and she nodded back. And that was all. And it was enough. Morgan Shaw was not at the exhibition. But a card arrived at the gallery that afternoon, addressed to Savannah in Morgan's handwriting. Inside was a single line. "I'm trying to be the person who tells the truth. It is harder than I thought. I hope you know I'm trying." Savannah read it twice, set it on the table, and said nothing about it to anyone, because some things are between 2 people, and the only fair response is time. In the months that followed, Cole Studio, named simply Directly, took its first 3 commissions, all significant, all in Savannah's name. All work she chose because the projects interested her, not because she needed to perform a version of herself for anyone else's benefit. The court-ordered reassessment of her divorce settlement produced a figure that Patricia described as appropriate, given the documented conduct. It was enough. Savannah didn't use the word enough as a consolation. She used it as a precise description of what she needed to build correctly from here. Brett Calloway's case proceeded through the legal system with the slow, grinding certainty of federal prosecution. Calloway Property Group filed for Chapter 11 in February. The Park Avenue office was vacated in March. His name, which had appeared on building facades and press releases and industry award lists for 2 decades, began its gradual disappearance from the places where it had been prominently displayed. Not erased dramatically, just gradually absent. The way a person becomes absent when the reason people paid attention to them is no longer present. On a Saturday morning in May, Savannah sat on the terrace of the apartment she had leased in Hayes Valley, San Francisco, with coffee and her notebook and the specific sound of the city waking up around her. Nathan was inside making breakfast, moving around the kitchen with the comfortable ease of someone who has been in a space long enough to know where things are kept. He had not asked her to be anything. She had not asked him to be anything. They had simply kept showing up in each other's presence until the distance between them became, by mutual unspoken agreement, unnecessary. She opened her notebook to a fresh page and wrote 3 words at the top. Next project. Hers. Then she looked out at the morning and sat with it quietly for a while before she picked up the pen again. Because she had learned, or relearned, or finally allowed herself to know, that a woman who has been stripped of everything and walks through it with her name intact comes out the other side with something that cannot be given by anyone and cannot be taken by anyone. The only thing that was ever truly hers. And from that, she could build anything. So, that's the story. If you're still here, honestly, if you made it all the way to this moment, then something in Savannah's journey must have landed somewhere real for you, not just as a story, as something that felt familiar. Maybe you've been in a room where someone looked right through you. Maybe you gave years of yourself to something, and one day realized your name wasn't on any of it anymore. That hits different when it's real. Marcus Aurelius wrote something that people are still quoting because it refuses to stop being true. You have power over your mind, not outside events. And once you realize that, you find the strength. Savannah didn't win because someone rescued her. She won because she never let go of who she actually was, even when everything around her was designed to make her forget. The Stoics called it amor fati, love of fate. Not loving the pain, loving the fact that the pain did not finish you. So if this story made you feel something tonight, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like the video. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. And remember this before you go. The only thing they can never take from you is the version of yourself that existed before you ever needed their approval. That version is still there. She's been waiting. This story is a work of original fictional drama, created entirely for entertainment and emotional storytelling purposes. All characters, including Savannah Cole, Brett Calloway, Nathan Pierce, Morgan Shaw, and Eleanor Voss, are completely imaginary and do not represent any real individuals, living or deceased. The events, locations, legal proceedings, financial situations, and personal relationships depicted in this narrative are invented and are not based on any real incident or real person. Any resemblance to actual people, organizations, or events is purely coincidental and unintentional. The storylines involving SEC investigations, financial fraud, and legal proceedings are dramatized solely for narrative effect and should not be interpreted as factual reporting or legal advice of any kind. But the purpose of this content is to explore universal themes of resilience, self-worth, betrayal, and personal rebuilding through the power of storytelling. Our goal is always to uplift, inspire, and offer meaningful reflection, not to mislead or misrepresent. We appreciate your understanding and your continued support of thoughtful, values-driven storytelling on this channel.